Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic podcast. My name is Alex Kapitko, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Drew Nepley. Drew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right on this Sunday. It's kind of cloudy, but I'm ready to dive into it.
Yeah, apparently we had like a crazy thunderstorm last night because I was up decently late and I went to bed, and I guess about 20 minutes after I went to bed, the dogs were freaking out and the whole neighborhood was just basically up in panic. So
Oh my
I don't know.
gosh.
I missed it, but I guess it's been very rainy. So yeah, fun times. But I hope things are going well. How's lockdown treating you?
I mean, I'm locked down. I was gonna say though, like if it is stormy, I mean, it's a lot easier to stay quarantined when it is stormy and rainy. I think.
Yeah.
I'd rather it be cruddy outside than perfect.
Yeah, I completely feel it. We bought a bow and arrow at our place, and so yesterday I was sitting out in the sun, just shooting some arrows, listening to some reggae, and just pretending I'm on the beach slash hunting range. I guess I don't know, but
Doing the best you can to escape a little bit. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
exactly. But yeah, so today I want to talk about something that I guess is coronavirus related, though it's kind of adjacent to the actual issue, and it's the World Health Organization, which I think is a group and a body that pretty much everyone's heard about at this point. But it's come back into the news because obviously during this coronavirus pandemic, there's been a lot of criticism about how the World Health Organization at first handled this. And now in the last week, a lot of Republicans with Trump spearheading it has said that he wants to defund the WHO because he's accusing China's misinformation and that the World Health Organization was kind of going along with this at first. And this is a complicated issue because the World Health Organization has been around since 1948 and it's done a lot of good and it has had some questionable things that have happened. So today I just want to kind of get into that, like what the World Health Organization is, why they're in the spotlight right now, and what could be done to maybe fix them. So I don't know, what are your first thoughts on this whole chaotic moment, I guess?
Well, when I first read the headline that Trump wants to withdraw funding from the WHO, of course I was like, oh my gosh, like, are you kidding me? Like the World Health Organization in the midst of a global pandemic, you want to defund it? But I will say that the more I learn about the criticism, like the reason behind it, though I may not agree with the actual route Trump is taking, there are some pretty valid criticisms of the WHO. So we need to kind of go over that. So first off, the basics, the WHO is kind of a branch of the United Nations, right? So it's this internationally funded thing. It's a group effort to make sure that there's an organization that can combat, global health issues. The WHO especially is really good at helping impoverished and developing nations kind of catch up on their health stuff, providing vaccines, whether it be Ebola or polio, right? So their goal is to basically be this bridge between all countries and as far as health concerns, aiding impoverished nations, and it gets funding from members of the UN. And the larger members of the UN, like the United States, pay a lot more. So the United States provides, what is it, 400 billion or is it million? Oh,
I think it's million.
Yeah, $400 million, which in 2019 was 15% of the WHO's funding. So 15% is a pretty good chunk. And it's a joint effort. So Trump is looking at withholding that 400 million. It's not decided yet, and there's even questions of whether or not he has the authority to do so. But his idea is to withhold the 400 million dollars of funding from the WHO as kind of a punishment for what he believes is their aiding in Chinese disinformation and failure to respond to the pandemic. I think there's some valid criticisms because the more we learn about what the WHO was doing earlier in this pandemic in January and February, it does seem like they kind of they took Chinese reporting at face value. So, when China was what we now know is completely underreporting, the WHO was kind of just accepting it. And I think that is strange given that in 2003, with the SARS outbreak, China underreported it until it left the country of China, and then everyone heard about it, and the WHO criticized China back then for underreporting and hiding information. So it's strange that it seems like the WHO has made the same mistake twice.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a reason for that, because I think you made it very clear, which was good, that the World Health Organization is not an independent body, right? I think a lot of people on face value might think this is just some global health organization that runs on its own, right? And like you said, that's not true. It's comprised of UN members.
Right.
I think pretty much all nation states are involved in it, and so it is an apparatus, much like other UN bodies, that are kind of held accountable by their members.
Right.
And I think the reason why, and this was kind of the Atlantic's point on this from a great piece they put out yesterday, was that the WHO failed because it's not designed to be independent. And I think that's an important point, is like in this exact case, like I want to go into the specifics a little bit, was back in January and February, China had said that there was no clear evidence of human to human transmission, which already, unfortunately, around the same time, it was already being proven that there was, because a woman from Wuhan who had traveled to Thailand had already started spreading it there, and it was a clear case of human to human transmission. And then around the same time, Hong Kong and Taiwan had both alerted the World Health Organization of their potential worries about this virus and its easy transmissibility. And the problem is, like you said, is that the World Health Organization didn't really question China's reporting. They went along with it and backed it up until much too late. And I think it answers to the main problem of the World Health Organization, in my opinion, is that they are pretty much held accountable by their members, like I said. And the problem is much like the Human Rights Council in the UN and all these other groups, is that they're accountable to dictators and Democrats alike. Right, is that a lot of these bodies have to be accountable to the United States and Germany and France and blah blah blah, but then at the same time they're also in league with people like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, and I think that's the problem, is that this is no perfect body that reflects just openness and transparency. It reflects the people on top of it, and I think we saw that come out of there because China has become a bigger and bigger world player since 2003, and they have a much bigger role inside of the World Health Organization. And I think it's just demonstrating what we've seen throughout all these other issues we've talked about, is that China is having large clout in these organizations. And there was a level of kind of, I guess you could call it somewhat bullying. And it's probably reasons why at the same time, Taiwan, who had warned the World Health Organization, at the same time wasn't listened, because they're not even a damn member, because China does not, acknowledge Taiwan as a country. And I think it's just this problem of this organization at the end of the day is political.
Right. I think I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, again, let's look at the various steps. China had given misinformation. Okay. World Health Organization takes it as fact. That's already kind of a strike. They should have been a little bit more, again, based on history, like with the SARS, they should have had a little bit more, hesitance to just take Chinese as fact. Then we have the example of, like you said, Taiwan had doctors look into this and had confirmed human-to-human transmission, in what was it, early February or late January?
I think it was January.
January, right? So the WHO then actively ignored information that they had from Taiwan. Why would they ignore information from Taiwan? Taiwan is not officially recognized by the WHO because of Chinese clout. Right, so you have this obvious politically charged. They're ignoring Taiwan because they don't want to even recognize them as a state. They're not a member of the WHO. They were up until 2017. Taiwan was allowed to attend WHO meetings until China banned them from. So they in recent years, there's actually been an active removal of Taiwan from WHO activities, and now we're seeing them when they do come back, like, hey guys, we have pretty vital information that is conflicting with what China is saying. They are completely ignored. So who is in charge of the WHO during all of this that would allow this to happen or have a part in this happening? Well, it's someone by the name of Tedros Adhanom. This guy is an Ethiopian microbiologist. He is the current Director General of the World Health Organization and has been since July 1st of 2017. This is the guy that I think is going to be held responsible for kind of the allowing China to, give disinformation to the world and him accepting it. And there's an interesting, why would he do something like this? Well, it seems that, that Atlantic article we talked about, it seems that they say that he was kind of put in his place at the WHO because of Chinese influence. And that is alarming to me that, someone that, has gotten help to be in his position from China is then now not willing to criticize China and takes their reporting as face value for fear of any, kind of political retribution and now we have a global pandemic, right? Many, Atlantic as well as others like the UN is reporting that if we had a couple more weeks earlier of a response, we could have actually reduced the cases by 50 to 80%. So this guy, Tedros, the head of the WHO, has to be held accountable. I think he should be fired. I think that his job was to prevent a global pandemic and to use the information provided to do the best response. He ignored information. He obviously was politically motivated to not criticize China, and the World Health Organization acted too late. So I see a lot of reason to criticize the WHO, and I think the first thing that should be done should be an international effort to get Tedros removed as the chief of the WHO.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think you're correct, because it does seem, and this is a growing issue, I think China has done, for the last decade in all different forms of international bodies, is that they are getting more might and more power, and they are taking advantage of it. And I think this is clearly one of those. And as we've talked about before, China does not care about your human rights record. They do not care about your values or your democratic values in that. And that article you shared with me from the National Review that I just skimmed before we started, Ethiopia is not exactly the beacon on the hill when it comes to human rights and for their system of governance. And they've come out of a pretty gnarly one-party regime over the last couple of years. And obviously, I'm not going to blame any biologists or health officials for the regime, but I just wonder why someone like him, who like clearly I don't see Ethiopia as being a country that really is known as transparent and open, but also we have seen that China is highly invested in this part of the world. And I would have to think that there is some Chinese loyalty on both sides to wanting someone like him up there, who has clearly been working with Chinese officials already before this. And it's just worrying to me, because those numbers that you say, like 50 and 80% of cases could have been averted. That's a travesty. And the worst part is that most news outlets are excited about how well Taiwan and Hong Kong have dealt with this issue. And the fact that the World Health Organization wouldn't even give either one of them much of a chance to listen is really alarming to me. Yes. But it's to me is reminiscent of kind of what happened, with Gaddafi when he was leading, I think, the UN Human Rights Council. That's the issue. Again, like I've said with these bodies, is that they play to politics and power. And I think you're right. The first step would be to get him to resign or step down in some form. But you have to think the issue wouldn't end there. And it does kind of concern me that now what Trump is doing, if I kind of turn to that, is like Trump almost could break this system worse by wanting to defund it, because he's accusing the World Health Organization of playing to China, right? And it's almost by Trump wanting to throw political might towards them as well. It's almost like he's trying to do the exact same thing. He wants to be one of the great powers that is trying to volley the World Health Organization against their will, And I'm just worried that it's going to be tough to get this organization to work when we have such a divided world. And I almost feel like the World Health Organization is kind of this intermediary between this kind of growing Cold War-esque conflict between the U.S. and China. And you almost have to wonder, can a body like this, especially in the first world, function well when we have these issues? Like, I understand their significance in the third world, because like you mentioned earlier, the almost eradication of polio, malaria, how they dealt with Ebola, the SARS conflict in 2003. They've done a lot of good. Right. But the problem is that they're also, like, for countries that have a good health system, they're just a guiding beacon. They're nothing else. And I just feel like it's more understandable if they're trying to lead an effort in Africa and something goes wrong. But if they're coordinating with China, they need to be transparent. And I mean, they were telling people just so much misguided information that it's a shame that we had this virus marinating in parts of the world for weeks without anyone giving us good information or transparent information. And it's kind of alarming. So I don't know.
I think what it is like, again, like I think that Trump's reasoning behind his actions is valid. I think that because he says I want to withdraw the $400 million because the World Health Organization was providing disinformation from agreeing with China, and it needs to be held accountable, right? He says himself it needs to be held accountable. I agree with that. Do I think that the withdrawal of the $400 is the right way to do that? No. Like you said, if this is something where we see China has way too much clout and political influence on what should be apolitical international health organizations, what we should not do is just take our money and leave, because then, okay, China will fill that void. That's exactly the whole point. I think that's what, I think long term, it's good for China that we don't want to be a part of this, because they'll continue to fill the void. Like you mentioned with the the economics of Ethiopia, right? Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. It could be one of those reasons that they wanted someone that was kind of pro-China's Belt and Road to be as part of this World Health Organization, i.e. Tedros, who then would be, more friendly to China. And in fact, Tedros met with the Chinese in January 2020. Tedros met with Chinese leaders, including Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Paramount leader Xi Jinping, about COVID-19. And then it was a few weeks after that he said measures that would unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade, such as worldwide travel restrictions, are not needed. That was in February. So he met with the Chinese in January, and and in February he says we don't need to take drastic measures to interfere with travel and trade. It sounds to me like someone that is trying to get on the Chinese Belt and Road bandwagon and protect that at the risk of public health. So I do think this guy needs to go. I do think that we need to take a serious look on the political influence on the World Health Organization. But as far as taking our $400 million and leaving the ball court, as far as I don't like the game being played, so I'm going to take my ball and leave, that just allows China to grasp more power. It gives the U.S. less influence in serious things like the response to a pandemic. So I don't think it's the right response. I'm not sure what the response should be. I think it should be, we need to call out China. We need to get as many allied countries on the same page that, hey, we need to have a World Health Organization that's not influenced by China, and maybe kick Tedros out. But we don't need to just abandon the idea altogether, because like you said, it does a lot of good, and I fear it would just leave a vacuum China would then take. Yes,
I think you're right, and I mean that's the issue with Trump. I think when it comes to international deals, and he likes to tear them up without any next step. I mean, I think we've seen it time and time again, and I think it's always the same with Trump, is that the criticism might be there,
yes,
but the actual action is never quite there. I mean, and like you said, this is a layered issue, and I'm just worried though. Trump's motives are different from the motives that need to be discussed. I think for him, this is a distraction from his administration's quite blatantly mishandling of this crisis. I think it's a very easy way for him to turn the blame on the World Health Organization and China, when, even though there's truth to that, he just wants to truly make this an us versus them pointing fingers at China issue. And the reality is that his argument is made better when you hear stories about Taiwan and Hong Kong, who basically showed the world that you can handle this crisis without literally any help from the World Health Organization. And that's what I'm worried about, is that we're forgetting that the fact that this virus hasn't even totally exploded in the third world yet.
Right.
And that's the place that the World Health Organization needs to operate, you know? And I'm worried that Trump is just turning this again into a finger pointing China versus the US thing. And it also doesn't help when the left in the US doesn't want anyone to call it the Wuhan virus. They don't want to call it this. It's all about names, and I think it shows you where we're at right now as a country and as a world with this crisis. Is there's kind of two narratives, that China was slow to respond, but now they're kind of the savior. They're exporting doctors to Italy and whatnot, and the World Health Organization's with them. And then there's the other narrative that Trump is trying to kind of play out, that China created this. Well, not created this virus, you know what I mean? But they allowed this to spread. And but again, like I said, we're forgetting about the third world. And I just wanted to read off, like, on the UN News's website, they have an article called 5 Reasons the World Needs the WHO. And I completely agree with you. I don't think the World Health Organization operated correctly, but we can't forget that they have 5 reasons. And those 5 reasons are: 1, they help countries to prepare and respond. They have a strategic preparedness and response plan that is uniform amongst the whole world, which is important. 2, they provide accurate information. Well, that one not quite as good from what we've talked about. But I think number 3 is crucial. They ensure vital supplies reach frontline health workers in third world countries, which is quite crucial because a lot of these countries don't have the resources to do it themselves. Number 4, they train and mobilize health workers. And 5, they are searching for the vaccine. And I think this is the key part, because they launched an agency called the Solidarity Trial, and they're looking to make a virus that is accessible to everyone. And I think, or not a virus, a vaccine, sorry. And I think that is one of the key parts of this, is they will be the ones that are streamlining global research to find a vaccine. And I don't know if we want the US or Germany or China independently finding a vaccine, because it's just going to be a game of control and politics. And so I think through all this BS and all this just craziness, we do forget at the end of the day that this is a unified global effort that may have leadership issues at the top, but the day-to-day experts that are working in this are crucial.
Right. Absolutely. No, that's why I think our response to this problem is not to just defund. And I agree with you. It should not just be defunding and abandoning ship, right? We're on a ship in the middle of a storm, and we're on the ship together. If the ship has leaks and holes in it, yes, we need to address that. But the idea should not just be to then abandon the ship. There are leaks and holes in the WHO, but it's still the ship that we need to get out of the storm. And we absolutely need to address the flaws when this dies down. I mean, there are blatant flaws. Again, I think Tedros is a corrupt leader of the WHO. I mean, he even said China's response will be the gold standard, the new standard for outbreak control. That's ridiculous. That is just beyond ridiculous. This guy needs to go. But the WHO, like you said, is vital, especially for developing nations, to have the resources to respond to this. And again, like you said, yeah, we really haven't seen the peak, especially in the developing world or semi-developing countries, like especially Brazil. I mean, Brazil is massively underreporting, is not providing test kits. Bolsonaro was kind of, a few weeks ago, Bolsonaro was still saying it was a hoax. So, I think you're right that there's countries that are still yet to flare up as big as we think they're going to be, and we still need the WHO and we need international communication and information and cooperation to tackle this. So, again, I think back to Trump's decision, he it's pretty obvious now that he sees things as business deals, right? And we know that now. He's even said it himself. He's a business-oriented guy, and he sees it as a deal. In his view, he sees we're spending $400 million on an organization that provides disinformation. I can see why he would say this is a bad deal, so I'm going to just back out. But I think the nuances of what the WHO is, it's not a business deal. It's supposed to be this cooperation. And so I don't think he's just viewing it in the right light. He has the criticism, but he doesn't have the response. And he's true to his character, at least, where he's viewing it as a bad business deal. But that's not what this is. It's something way more complex. And I don't think I think we need to continue our funding, absolutely. But when the dust does settle, there are some serious, blatant corruption problems that we need to address.
Yeah. I mean, like the first thing to address, I think, of what you said is that, I think historically, and this is just my theory. Obviously, I don't have anything to back it up yet because I can't see the future. But I think that China might be one of Trump's only "I told you so's."
Yeah.
That will come out of his presidency. Because I keep thinking back on this, and I hate myself for saying it sometimes, but I almost full-heartedly agree on everything he says about China. But like you said, it's the carry out of these ideas that freak me out. I mean, back to the trade war, if he
Right.
was just honest and said, yeah, in the short term, this is going to hurt Americans, but in the long term, it's better, because we're seeing in the long term, it's already been better.
Uh-huh.
I mean, breaking those supply chains with China early on has actually helped us avoid some
Right.
of the major pain of this whole pandemic.
Right.
But he's not honest, and he's too transactional about it. But the truth is that I think the bigger question, this is kind of hypothetical, and I'm curious your thoughts, is, but do you almost think that we need to reconsider UN membership? Because,
Yes.
like, in my opinion, I've always thought the UN was like the club of, world leaders and people that value something bigger than their country. And now it just kind of seems like everyone's welcome. It's like that party where they let anyone in, and who really cares if someone starts a fight in it? Like, you're welcome. Anyone can come in. And I just think that's a problem.
Right. That's actually a good point too. Is what we're looking at the UN as a whole now, especially when you have kind of what I would consider bad actors like China and like Russia, right? And I'm sure that a lot of other states would consider the U.S. a bad actor at times as too. I mean, the U.S. has no shortage of controversy with the UN, but yeah, I definitely think that that's something to look at as far as, like, is this really just going to be something that we just let anyone in, or do we have to have some kind of standard of human? If you're violating human rights, you can't be a part. You can't be a part of this. If you're violating, certain freedom of press, you can't be a part of this. But it seems like that's not a concern. And in fact, we mentioned it before, we've had members like Saudi Arabia on the Human Rights Commission, and you're like, are you kidding me? That they still stone people in the street. Like, I don't. So yeah, you're definitely right. And again, that is something that I do have to give credit to Trump, as well as to kind of the right wing in the United States as a whole, is they've always been critical of the UN, and there's definitely reason to be. But I still think the notion of this international cooperation is still valid and worth seeking out. And so I think you make a good point about looking at what does membership require to be part of something that is supposed to be cooperative. Because again, yeah, like we now know that China, Russia, as well as other states are acting in their own interest most of the time. And unfortunately, right, when you talk about the theory of kind of international relations, a lot of people believe it will always be the case. We will always just have countries, especially larger powers, only acting in their own interest. And so, I know it's tough to combat, but I do think something like the UN is how you have to combat that thing. But we do have to hold people accountable more. Absolutely. It's just hard to do that. How do you do that, right? I mean, how do you kick China and Russia out of the UN when they already have so much sway?
Right. It's true, and I think there were a lot of projections coming into the 21st century that maybe didn't see Russia and China going on this trajectory as well.
Right.
I think there was a lot of optimism out of the end of the Cold War on how Russia was going to handle this next century. But the problem is I think we always, with our models, we always kind of neglect the cultural aspects of it, and the fact that Russia and China just are kind of these utilitarian societies that, especially when it comes to China, and especially when you have a one-party government, it's very easy to play bad. I mean, there's the Uyghur situation, like we've talked about. We have the Chechens inside of Russia and Chechnya. I mean, it's nothing new, and I think the problem is that states change too. So, one day you could have Hungary, a friendly member with democratic values, and then you look down the road and you have Viktor Orban. So, like, I think it's hard to really just say, like, we're only going to let in good players, even though I wish we did, because people change, countries change, culture changes in the terms of what's going on in the world, and
Right.
And it would be really tough. And I mean, I think we both said this at different times on the podcast, is that I think it's better to talk to your enemies than your friends. I mean, not to your friends, but you know what I mean. It's better to talk to your enemies than ignore them.
Yeah.
And I just worry that if we did kick them out of it, then the catch-22 would be, then do they just get worse? So I just don't know. But I think the right in the U.S., like you said, has has had more of a hesitance towards these organizations, I think for good and for bad.
Mhm.
But I mean, but it's true that, I mean, I think the elephant in the room as well is that we are getting kind of into something that's been unprecedented since the Cold War, but it's even more powerful, I think, now than during the Cold War, is we're kind of in a dual hegemonic world,
Yes.
a dual power world. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, this whole World Health Organization is just kind of a fight over whose doctrine and whose ideology is better. And we're seeing, we're seeing parts of the world take advantage of that. So I don't know. It's worrying to me to think about it, but I just, to kind of go back full circle to Trump in this, is you don't pull funding out in the middle of a crisis. Like,
Right.
that's the worst time to do it. Like, I mean, I've seen videos on YouTube of doctors saying, like, you can criticize the up top politics, but at the end of the day, we need the World Health Organization.
Yes. On the ground, you need those resources. Look, if it's something like, we're in 2021, the pandemic has passed its peak. You know what I mean? We're on the tail end. We can analyze what's happened. We have 2020 hindsight. And Trump says, look, we might consider withholding funding if Tedros is still the, we want to change the administration of the WHO. And if you're unwilling to remove Tedros and allow Chinese corruption, then we might consider withholding funding. I can see that. That's using leverage to change the organization. And I think that is what Trump's trying to do. Or what Trump, but the problem is he's doing it at the wrong time, and he's doing it with no replacement. He's just saying, we're just going to back out. It's a bad deal. We're going to back out. Instead of saying, look, we have a bad deal because of Chinese corruption, and we as an international community need to solve this together. That's what should be done. And perhaps, not in the midst of the pandemic, right? Again, because you're right, because that $400 million, that's not going to remove Tedros from his office. What it is going to do is remove the resources on the ground to give people masks, test kits, eventually the vaccine when they have it. So yeah, again, to wrap it up, I think we're both in agreement that Trump, especially with China, Trump has been very honest in his criticism. I think we do need to look at that criticism. It's valid, but the response he has can be a little premature and maybe not as cooperative with our allies as it needs to be.
Right. And, I also worry, though, that China's kind of winning the PR game in this whole crisis as well, which I think is something that also just does need to be addressed, is that China mishandled this clearly and blatantly at the beginning.
Yes.
But since then, they've been sending resources to everywhere from Europe to South America. Right. And they've been sending doctors and masks and ventilators. And while that's happening, the U.S. is reported to have basically interfered with 200,000 protective masks off the coast of Thailand that were supposed to go to Germany. And this is not confirmed, but there are a lot of reports from sites such as The Guardian and The Economist and The Atlantic that all say that basically the U.S. did an overseas heist of masks to get for themselves. And it's this us versus you mentality that I think China is going to take advantage of, because we have pissed off almost every European country in this process, like usual. And it's going to be hard to turn democracies against China and the World Health Organization if we're stealing freaking masks from them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's tough, man. It's tough.
At the same time that China is doing the best it can to consolidate more clout and influence and power, the United States is retreating from the global community and with the whole America First thing. And I think that is detrimental, especially in times like this when you absolutely need global cooperation because it's a global public health issue. It's, again, we're all on this boat together. Abandoning ship is not the way to go. Or going on your own little tiny boat in the middle of a giant storm is not the way to go. This is a cooperative thing. It's a shame. If that's true that we halted the movement of 200,000 masks, that's just such a shame, and it just I don't know. It just shows that we really just can't be on our own anymore. The idea that nation states are on their own little kingdoms, on their own little borders, is just not true anymore. It's a global community, and these problems have to be addressed globally. And I think withholding funding from the WHO in this time is not the right way to do it, even though it deserves to be criticized.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's well put. But before we're out of here, I just have to ask you as a side note, what do you think about all the like controversy in the U.S. over the name of the virus?
I mean, look, I'm just gonna go with like. Here's the thing with naming, man. Naming doesn't even always but people name things that isn't even always true. The Spanish flu started in the Midwest of the United States. It only got called the
Right.
Spanish flu because the outbreak was more drastic at the beginning in Spain, but it came from the Midwest United States. But people now call it the Spanish flu. If people call it the Chinese flu, I guess it makes sense if it's from Wuhan. But really, at the end of the day, the most accurate way to describe it is just what scientists call it: the coronavirus or COVID-19. I think it's a non-issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think right now we need to not be concerned about what the name of the virus is, and more concerned about how to stop it.
Yeah, that's fair. I just think that in the United States, the clearly like kind of PC method of saying we can't call it the Wuhan virus or I'm against calling it the China virus because we don't call any viruses by the country it comes from. We call it by the region or the specific place it was picked up, like Ebola, Lyme disease, Zika. All these are named after a river or forest or a region they've come from. So I think
Yeah.
Wuhan is fine, but I think the fact that a lot of the like far left people say it's racist to call it the Wuhan virus kind of buys into this idea because they said, well, why don't we call it the Milan virus because it was bad in Italy as well. And I say, but it wasn't the mismanagement of a crisis that led to a world pandemic either, And so I
Right.
think that's a big problem in the U.S. is we can't even agree on how drastically bad China dealt with this at first because it's not the Italian virus, it's not a Milan virus. They're just unfortunately a place that got heavily impacted by it.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. Again, I mean, I think regardless of political affiliation, if you're really taking the time to be upset over what people call the virus, I just don't think it's that important. I think what is important is like we talked about is the people that are responsible for this are held accountable. And that partly is China. So yeah, I mean, if someone says it's a Chinese virus and China did play a part in allowing it to spread, that's true. That's true to me. So I don't really see an issue. Obviously, I'm not encouraging. Obviously, we don't want to go the route of then the average person on the street who is Chinese we're then blaming as well. That's not what we should be doing. We should be blaming the Communist Party of China, the government in charge, not the people. But yeah, again, the naming of the virus, I think, to me is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
At the end of the
Yeah,
day.
and because I've seen it in Spain that I've heard people people I associate with like Spanish people that say, oh, the effing Chinese, and that's not the point of it, and it goes
No,
back to the World Health Organization and everything is you can't blame the whole crowd or the population
of course
because of
not.
the corruption at the top,
They
but
were
I think
lied
that's
to as well.
unfortunately
Yeah, the Chinese people were lied
yeah,
to as well. I mean, the average Chinese citizen was given disinformation by their own government. You can't blame the person. You blame the
no,
government.
exactly. Exactly. Well, on that, I don't know if you have any more thoughts, but we're just gonna have to see see
See
how
what
this keeps
happens.
going. But
Yes.
but I think it's going to be an interesting next couple months, politically, health wise, internationally. Just everything's going to be really crazy.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see a year or two down the line how people look back, how when the 2020 hindsight really sets in, how we're going to change our behavior and our infrastructures and our institutions like the WHO. I'd be interesting to see how we address these problems. But yes, those listening, what do you think? The WHO, how responsible are they for where we are today with this global pandemic? What do you think about Trump's response to potentially remove $400 million of funding? What about, or the criticism? Is it valid? Is it not valid? What would you do in this situation? Let us know your thoughts. And as always, tune in for our twice a week regular episodes, and our in between we have a little bit of a catch up episode that's a short. So thank you all for listening.